You and I know real value is hidden. That rusted car rolled into the Apex Invitational, the country's most elite automotive showcase. Those billionaires in the VIP section started laughing before the engine even died. Faded paint hung off the doors in jagged, ugly strips. It showed the bare metal underneath, just like old scars. A massive crack sliced all the way across the windshield, bottom left to top right. The back license plate dangled crooked, clinging on by one single shaky bolt. Elijah climbed out, reaching back to grab Grace's hand as she hopped from the passenger side. A tiny 6-year-old hugging a stuffed rabbit tight to her chest with both hands. He kept walking forward, zero hesitation. Diana had rolled in earlier with a fleet of black SUVs. She just bought a $9 million luxury coupe, parked 3 spots over to the left. She stared at the junker, then Elijah, and let a nasty, arrogant smirk spread across her face. "I think you have the wrong address," she announced, making sure everyone around could hear. "The junkyard is on 12, about 3 miles back." Elijah just kept quiet. He strolled to the front grille and popped the hood. "Stick with me here, because you and I are about to see what real hidden value looks like." His phone alarm flashed 5:30 when he swiped it off, eyes completely shut. They lived in a tiny 2-bedroom apartment out on the edge of Detroit's west side. Before his brain fully woke up, he heard the old fridge rattling in the kitchen. And through paper-thin walls, the early morning freight train rumbling 3 blocks away. He pushed off his knees and stood up. The kitchen bulb buzzed when he flipped the switch. A quiet noise he did not even notice anymore. He loaded up the coffee machine and stood by the counter while it brewed. That cramped room showed their real struggles in quiet ways. A dark water stain by the window that was there the day he signed the lease. A wobbly dining table balanced on a folded piece of cardboard under one leg. A stack of unpaid bills inside a plastic folder, edges perfectly straight. But Grace had her own special corner, crayon drawings pinned to the wall in perfect rows. None of them touched. Each picture showed a tall guy and a little girl doing normal things. Taking a walk, fixing an old car, eating at a table. He stared at those pure, priceless drawings while his coffee dripped. Grace padded into the kitchen barefoot, the stuffed rabbit biscuit squeezed under one arm, her messy hair still squished flat from the pillow. She walked across the linoleum and hugged his leg tight without saying a single word. Just like she did every morning, checking he was still there before starting her day. "Are we going to the place with the pretty cars today?" she mumbled, her tiny voice still thick from sleeping. He gently rubbed the back of her head. "Pretty or not, we're about to find out." She thought about that with the deep focus of a tiny philosopher, nodded, and went to grab her shoes. Elijah was 31. Number that felt neither too old nor too young on a morning exactly like this. He spent 9 hard years as a senior engine builder at Meridian Components, a mid-level car parts supplier east of Detroit, until the place was bought out and gutted, destroying his job along with 400 others. That brutal termination letter arrived in March. You and I know tragedy strips away the polish. It came 3 months and 11 days after his wife Emily was killed by a drunk driver heading home from her mother's house. His daughter Grace was just 3 years old. On the outside, you'd never guess the man was completely shattered. To the world, he just downsized, sold their home, moved his kid into a cheap apartment, took consulting gigs. Scraping by on freelance mechanical reviews, just barely keeping his kid fed and the winter heat running. But every night, once little Grace was finally asleep, he'd vanish into the cramped, ugly garage out back, not to turn cheap wrenches for extra cash. He was turning invisible grief into pure genius, forging raw pain into the mechanical shape of motion. Over 3 quiet, hidden years, it morphed into the absolute toughest engineering masterpiece of his entire life. He simply called it Emily's project. Sure, part of that was pure heartache for his late wife. But really, the very first sketch happened the night of her funeral. The man desperately needed somewhere to put his shaking hands, and the only cheap therapy around was a pencil and blank paper. He started mapping out a brilliant principle that had been locked inside his head for years. A wildly advanced combustion design that no rich corporate backer would ever actually fund. That awful night with his whole world looking like garbage, pouring pain into those drawings, was his escape. He never gave it a fancy name, never wasted money filing an official patent. He hadn't shown a single snob, but that hiding game ended today. The rusted 1974 Dodge waited in the dark garage. A sad $300 junker from an estate sale, picked strictly for its dirt-cheap price tag. Look at it with me, people would laugh, faded, ugly, oxidized paint peeling off in sad uneven patches everywhere. The passenger door was totally caved in. The driver's mirror, held together with cheap scraps of twisted wire. Even the cheap rear seat upholstery was ripped completely open. 50 brutal years of pure neglect showed on absolutely every single dented surface. But here's the secret. When Elijah turned the key and it fired up, the brilliant roar beneath that rusty hood completely betrayed the laughingstock exterior. This wasn't the coughing, broken rattle of some old trash car. It was precise, masterfully layered. It had a quiet hum that screamed genius engineering, not luck. A deep, perfect vibration sat beneath the idle, rumbling straight up through the rusted floorboards. It could never be explained by any sloppy factory line leaving Detroit in 1974. Grace clapped happily. "Biscuit likes Daddy's car sound." "I know she does," he smiled, dropping it into gear. 3 long years of midnight shifts and endless notebooks covered in pencil sketches. Cheap scrap parts dug out of liquidation bins, perfectly machined by hand between midnight and 4 in the morning. Whatever genius miracle lived beneath that battered hood, Elijah forged it alone. No big corporate sponsors, no expensive lab, no partners. He didn't build this hidden masterpiece to get rich or impress snobbish billionaires. He built it purely for himself. He desperately needed to know the brilliant man his wife believed in was still hiding in there. The beat-up Dodge rolled through the dark morning streets, heading east. Behind an ugly, cracked windshield, Elijah simply drove in silence. The huge Detroit Convention Center was completely transformed for this high society event. Fancy banners for the Apex Invitational flapped from the streetlights along the drive, all rich dark navy with sharp, expensive silver letters. It was that snobby, quiet design that screams old money and zero outsiders allowed. The outdoor competition zone swallowed up the entire east lot. Picture this scene. Half an acre of perfect blacktop where the richest corporate powertrain designs would be proudly paraded around and judged. Meanwhile, the indoor hall. It featured an exclusive VIP lounge and a pristine showroom for 3 shiny prototypes. These supercars from giant tech brands sat on velvet platforms under million-dollar lighting. These shiny entries were exactly what the snobby, high-class crowd expected. A stripped Lamborghini frame completely wired for electric. Its drivetrain hummed on a test track near the far fence. A slick Tesla prototype sat behind fancy corporate signs, guarded by 3 engineers wearing identical tailored jackets. Nearby, a sliced-open BMW concept motor sat perfectly mounted on a pedestal. Every single shiny part neatly tagged with laser-cut plastic. Every entry in the whole lot had a support crew. Fancy spec sheets printed on heavy, expensive glossy paper. You and I could easily tell these rides had massive corporate budgets behind them. Then Elijah rolled his beat-up Dodge into the queue. The gate guard stared at the rust, then checked the clipboard. He gave the beater another long stare, scanned the forms again, and just waved him in. Little Grace glued her face to the glass, taking in the sea of shiny chrome. "Daddy," she asked, "is our car as pretty as those?" "Different kind of pretty," he smiled. The lot attendant pointed them straight to spot 14. Elijah killed the engine, hopped out, and lifted his daughter to the pavement. Holding a stuffed dog tight, she took in the massive car show with the pure, calm stare of a kid who hasn't learned to fear big money just yet. 9:15 hit and Diana rolled up in 3 matching black SUVs. She stepped out of the middle truck with the smooth, easy movements of a boss who expects doors opened. Just 32, running the massive Vance automotive empire. She took a tiny local parts supplier and bought her way straight into the Fortune 100. Bold, new designs. But mostly she had a sharp eye for spotting hidden value before competitors did. Dark jacket, plain shirt, hair tied back tight, and not a single piece of jewelry showing. She didn't dress to impress anyone. She already owned the room. Her pure confidence hit you like a truck before she even opened her mouth. Her assistant marched right beside her, reading off the day's schedule from a tablet in quiet tones. Then came Marcus Carter, Vance's head of research and development. A guy whose ego had definitely grown right alongside his fancy corporate title lately. He flanked her other side, pitching his quarterly budget while steering her straight toward the exact answer he was hoping for. Carter actually spotted the rusty Dodge first. He choked on his words, stared at the junker, glanced at Elijah, and turned to his boss. "What is that?" he scoffed. "They're letting something like that into the competition area?" Diana stopped and turned. She eyed the beater, then she studied the tired father. "Let's picture this together." He was just lifting his little girl onto the scratched hood to see better. She sized up the whole car in one fast look. A harsh sweep calculating net worth and rust all at once. She gave Elijah a cold smirk like a rich tourist, finding it slightly funny that such a cheap piece of trash made it past the velvet rope. "I think you might have the wrong address," she mocked, loud enough to echo across the pavement. "The junkyard is on Route 12, 3 miles back." Plenty of folks stood close enough to hear. A handful of the snobby crew, working the flashy corporate booths, heard her jab and let out quick, cruel chuckles. That blind, knee-jerk laugh folks give before realizing what's actually hiding beneath the surface. Elijah turned to face her, no anger, zero embarrassment. He knew his worth. He simply looked at her like watching a passing storm, acknowledging it, but finding her judgment completely meaningless. "Thank you," he replied, "but I am exactly where I belong." He turned back to Grace, gently lifting his daughter from the rusty hood to the asphalt. Grace studied the wealthy woman with the pure, unfiltered judgment only a 6-year-old possesses, seeing right through the flash before returning to Biscuit. Carter marched straight to the registration table. He walked with that arrogant swagger of a man whose wealth usually brought immediate results. He approached the organizer's desk with the polished, practiced ease of a guy who expected instant obedience. He demanded a full review of Elijah's entry credentials. He argued that this rusted scrap metal couldn't possibly meet the primary category's technical threshold. Sebastian Howell, the show's rigorous chief judge, a sharp, silver-haired automotive engineer who had spent 30 years in competitive motorsport before shifting gears into certification and academia, picked up Elijah's Underdog registration file and studied it closely. Entry category, innovative powertrain design. The hardest technical classification on the card, the biggest prize. Carter let out a mocking scoff, too arrogant to even form a full sentence. Powertrain innovation in a 50-year-old rust bucket. Is he serious? Sebastian just closed the file, stamped the approval line hard, and slid it back to the clerk. "The process is the process," he said plainly. Back outside, Elijah finally opened the hood for setup. With his back to the mocking crowd, he quietly tweaked a fuel delivery manifold connection. "Now you and I know the best secrets hide in plain sight." As Sebastian walked past, the angle forced him to glance under that rusty hood. The judge slowed his pace slightly. He kept walking, reached the far path, paused, and quickly scribbled something on his clipboard margin. Just a tiny private note, but that mastermind had seen the hidden truth. Meanwhile, Elijah focused on his setup checklist with the quiet precision of a builder who had perfected this exact sequence countless times in a dark, empty garage. Grace claimed a cheap fold-out camp chair from the back seat and happily unzipped her scattered drawing supplies. She drew with fierce focus. She saw the magic in that car and fully intended to bring it alive. She sketched her dad's old Dodge, but her true version. The battered car had massive, sweeping wings bursting from the rear panels, soaring up at the very tips. She shaded it with a brilliant yellow she called warm sunshine, using careful, deliberate strokes. A rich kid from the VIP area wandered over, maybe 8 years old, wearing a crisp shirt and spotless designer sneakers. He stared at her artwork with that brutal, unfiltered honesty kids use before learning any social grace. "Your car is really ugly," he declared. Grace looked at him, then down at her drawing, and calmly back at him. "Inside, it's actually really beautiful," she said simply. The wealthy kid had absolutely no comeback for that hidden truth, eventually drifting back toward the building. Charlotte, standing 12 feet away checking the morning's media log, had absorbed every single word. She studied Grace, then truly looked at the rusty Dodge. Meanwhile, Carter cornered Elijah completely alone, without Diana's moderating presence or the strict authority of Sebastian anywhere in sight. Carter's voice dropped. The loud public mocking from the parking lot shifted into something dangerously cold and calculated. "You and I recognize this tone. No more mocking. Just a cold, calculated warning he expected Elijah to swallow whole. Picture this auto expo." He stood near Elijah, voice icy. I checked your history. 9 years at Meridian Components, then out when Dalton bought the firm. Not a single patent in your name since the restructuring. No corporate backing, no lab access, he let that sink in. Yet you roll into this luxury auto expo and register for the absolute highest technical tier. Elijah ignored the snobbery, keeping his hands busy wiring the data logger to the engine computer. He didn't even blink. I am giving you the professional courtesy of harsh reality. Carter pressed on. Diana doesn't waste her time on little projects that cannot scale. Whatever you hid inside that rusty shell, even if it's clever, you lack the power to actually take this innovation anywhere. No money, no reputation, just walk away before the first round even begins. Save yourself the sheer embarrassment of rejection. Elijah calmly set down the wiring and finally looked Carter square in the eye. I am here to compete, he replied, not to ask your permission. Carter just stared. He arrogantly fixed his expensive jacket and walked off. At the edge of the display, he paused, back turned. You will regret staying. His flat tone carried the heavy weight of a real threat. Later on, Sebastian wandered back, supposedly to just collect some extra paperwork. But he lingered far longer than naturally needed. Standing close by, he stared into that dirty engine bay, lowering his judge's clipboard entirely. I am really not trying to pry, he whispered quietly. Let's look at this together. That engine block layout, I have never seen a profile like it. Did you build this masterpiece entirely from scratch? Yes, Elijah said, working from basic principles, Sebastian pushed, or did you invent entirely new thermal concepts? The chamber geometry is totally original, the fuel pathway is original, even the electronic logic is mine. Anyone else helping you out? Engineers, experts, university labs, just me. A tiny apartment garage, 12-amp circuit. Sebastian scribbled furiously on his clipboard for 20 seconds before finally capping his pen. Up in the VIP lounge, Diana stood by the glass, keeping a clear view of the show floor. She wasn't intentionally watching that rusted Underdog car. But when her assistant whispered the exact conversation that just happened between Elijah's little girl and the snobby rich kid, Diana slowly turned away from the glass. She said the inside is beautiful. Word for word, Diana stayed completely silent, suddenly absorbing it. And Sebastian studied that junker for 15 minutes. That is longer than any other build. Diana glanced back through the glass toward the scrap pile. Her face didn't hold that same mocking arrogance from out in the VIP parking lot anymore. That older look was just cheap, unthinking judgment. This was totally different. A sudden realization she had not quite figured out how to handle yet. The first official evaluation round kicked off at 2 in the afternoon. Elijah's setup was easily the most basic one there. No glossy brochures, no corporate staff, just little Grace coloring in her chair alongside her dad in that beaten-up old Dodge. Then he finally fired up the engine for the judges. You and I know real power when we hear it. That exhaust note sounded entirely different from everything else in that lot. Not louder, pure, hidden brilliance. You and I know real power. It grabbed the nearby engineers before they even chose to listen. One young tech from the flashy booth, 2 spots over, leaned in close to his buddy, dropping his voice to a whisper. That sound, he muttered, that is not your standard engine burning gas. His partner was already staring. Way across the blacktop, Carter stood with a phone pressed against his ear. His sharp eyes scanned the wealthy crowd, tracking their shock. He talked for 90 seconds, listened hard, hung up, and slipped the phone into his tailored jacket. His cold face never gave a single thing away. The formal complaint moved through the proper channels, which was the easiest way to hide exactly what this move really was, pure panic. Some rich guy on the main organizing committee, the man running event logistics, a guy named Paul Whitfield, who just happened to take $40,000 from a Vance shell company the year before, told Sebastian right around 3 that someone demanded a full legal review of who really owned Elijah's design. The fake excuse the rusty car had no fancy corporate backer, no patent record, or fancy paperwork to prove his genius design was actually his own. Whitfield played it off as standard rules for big-money auto shows. Sebastian read the printed demand twice. He knew exactly who sent it, even with no name attached. He'd spent enough time around rich bullies making sneaky plays to know exactly what this ugly trap looked like. How long does a full ownership check take? He asked quietly. up to 48 hours. But the show judging ends by tomorrow afternoon. Sebastian dropped the paper on his desk and just stared at the rigged game before him. I will go tell the driver, he said. The stiff official gave Elijah the bad news using cold corporate rulebook talk. His beat-up entry was flagged for a deeper legal check. They wouldn't even judge the car during this main event phase. They could not promise an answer before the grand prize was awarded. Elijah stood there the whole time, hands buried deep in his pockets, his calm face never flinching. When the suit finally stopped talking, Grace looked up. Are we not in the show anymore, Daddy? He dropped down low, right to her eye level, holding her gaze with pure, quiet strength. We are still in it. We just have to wait a tiny bit longer. She processed this simply, just like waiting for cookies to bake in the oven. She gave a firm nod, turned to Biscuit, and whispered the new plan to her stuffed toy. Elijah stood back up. He refused to look for Carter. He didn't even glance toward the flashy VIP tents. Instead, he turned back to his dusty ride and laid one calloused hand against the rusty door. Stick with me here. He stared into that engine block like a man who knew the priceless power buried under all that ugly rust. Diana had wandered away from the glass lounge window later that afternoon. Now she stood in the open air, right behind the shiny main lineup, frozen in her tracks. She didn't mean to stop, but the quiet drama over at that battered car simply grabbed her focus. She watched the poor mechanic kneel down to his daughter. She saw him rest a gentle hand on the little girl's head. She watched Grace absorb the hard news. However, her dad had softened the blow. We all know true class when we see it. She nodded, grabbed her toy, and kept on drawing. You and I know real value hides well. Diana stood perfectly still, undecided until Charlotte approached. They were veteran partners. Charlotte knew exactly when to drop the act and just speak plainly. You know this isn't a real Providence issue, Charlotte murmured. Marcus pushed that request through Whitfield. The exact same Whitfield draining the event budget every single year since the corporate merger. Her tone stayed perfectly flat, completely unspectacular. She delivered the facts like always, pure and simple. Marcus was panicking. Suits only panic like that when they fear actual genius beating them. Diana finally looked at her. Then her eyes locked onto Spot 14, a solo guy, zero corporate backing. She spoke slowly, like she was doing heavy math right out loud. No partners, no fancy lab. A total unknown entering the toughest technical bracket at the biggest auto show in the nation. Exactly, Charlotte nodded. The billionaire spent 15 minutes staring at his rusty car. And a kid spots the beauty hidden inside. Diana went totally silent. Those aren't flukes. She marched straight over to Spot 14. Elijah spotted her approaching, but he didn't stop his gritty work. He unhooked his engine computer port, logged the idle specs into a cheap notebook, and only looked up once she finally stopped. Diana skipped the fake corporate smiles. Tell me the absolute truth. That wild prototype engine, did you design it alone? Every wire and bolt, with zero sponsor money and no high-tech lab? Built in my apartment garage. 3 years of night shifts. Why no patent? Why not pitch investors? You knew this was gold. Elijah just stared back. Patents cost cash I lacked. Chasing rich investors took time I needed for my daughter. He took a breath. After my wife passed, selling wasn't the goal anymore. I just wanted to finish it. Your wife Emily died 4 years back. This old car is what I built after. He wasn't begging for pity. He spoke because she demanded the truth, and he gave her the raw reality. Let's pause right here together. No fake sob story, just the heavy, unbreakable weight of truth. Diana studied his face in total silence for a bit. I want to see underneath, she muttered. Prove I'm cleared for the showcase, and I'll expose it all. I will personally make it happen. She spun around and almost hit Carter, who had sneaked up entirely uninvited. The suit's face twisted into sheer panic seeing them whispering secrets next to that rusty old Dodge. No handlers, no fancy clipboards, bypassing every snobby protocol he spent weeks guarding. The reality hit his ego like a physical punch. He stood speechless, just glaring at the two of them. Then he just spun around, storming toward the judges' tables in silence. The billionaire Sebastian Howell rarely acted on blind emotion, but he never wasted a single second once he saw real brilliance hiding in plain sight. He had been obsessively reading the specs. The raw files Elijah submitted for the tech showcase earlier. 47 pages of hand-drawn blueprints and raw math. rough test logs, scanned in pieces and quietly dropped into the main event portal. Most rich snobs barely submitted 3 pages. 47 pages of genius hand-drawn notes was far from normal. You and I know the truth, pure hidden gold. You and I know appearances deceive. He tracked Diana down near the VIP lounge, shoved the paperwork into her hands, and demanded 5 minutes of her time. She didn't even bother finding a chair to sit in. Flipping pages fast, reading the raw technical data like it was her native tongue. By page 6, her face shifted. Hitting page 11, she froze. She stared at a single layout with the fierce focus she usually saved for multi-million-dollar corporate buyouts. She looked up at Sebastian. He wrote every single line of this himself. I checked these engineering concepts against public patents and academic papers. Even dug through the private tech records I see at the certification board. Nothing out there matches this genius setup, nothing in history. This is pure originality. That theft claim they filed is completely empty, totally baseless. He stated it flatly, simply delivering the hard truth everyone else had missed. If they delay his judging past the event deadline, this brilliant machine gets 0 credit for what it actually achieved. Diana slammed the folder shut. I need to see this motor right now. As they marched toward spot 14, a small crowd naturally formed around them, drawn by the sudden shift in energy. Diana led the charge, Sebastian right behind. 2 officials who had been grilling Sebastian tagged along. They just trailed after her without a single word. Tech guys from a nearby booth. They watched the rich crowd's mockery all afternoon, and now followed them, sensing the hidden value was finally surfacing. Carter chased them down, moving aggressively until Charlotte blocked his path at the row's edge. She matched his speed in total silence, refusing to let him pass. Elijah watched the wealthy elites approach. He stood by his beat-up door, hand resting on the roof, Grace chewing a biscuit nearby. She observed the gathering crowd with that same wide, calm patience she had shown all through this ridiculous afternoon circus. Diana stopped right before the rusting junker. Let's look closely here. She stopped seeing a rusty joke. Instead, she viewed it as the humble shell protecting the 47 pages of brilliance she just read. Her gaze traced past the ugly bodywork, scanning the hood down to the edges of the bay. Will you open it for me? She asked. Elijah stepped to the front grille. His fingers gripped the rusted latch. He hesitated, not to build suspense for these laughing strangers, but because sharing true value is hard. He had never exposed this hidden genius before. What sat hidden underneath? That engine bay was a sacred hidden project between him and his late wife for 3 years. Now the laughing stops. He popped the hood up. The entire crowd fell dead silent. The motor resting inside bore absolutely 0 connection to the rusty, peeling exterior around it. While the outside screamed cheap scrap metal, the mechanics hidden below screamed pure genius, flawless logic, and absolute perfection. The engine block was milled by hand, perfectly smooth, beautiful. Its fuel system relied on a completely custom intake structure. Running aerospace parts he scrounged from a local military scrap sale. He spent 6 months hunting those defense liquidations to afford real quality on a dad's empty wallet. The combustion setup completely destroyed anything major automakers ever put on pavement. A wildly clever angled chamber layout. You and I see the real magic here. It cut heat loss by 38% compared to standard engines. The engine's hidden brain was patched together from a custom circuit board, blending standard commercial chips with a brilliant self-coded algorithm Elijah perfected over 18 grueling months. You and I know the truth. This rig weighed 22% less than comparable factory motors. Their mocking silence dragged on for seconds, until one voice finally broke it. Is that thermal barrier coating on those pistons? A sharp engineer stepped up, just an independent guy who looked past the rust, no racing team ties. Just a guy recognizing absolute genius when he saw it. You applied that by hand. Plasma spray process, Elijah calmly replied. I built a small rig for it. Took 4 months to get that bond consistency perfect. And this injection pathway, you're not running standard common rail architecture at all. No, I bypassed the pressure accumulator completely. Direct electronic metering per cylinder, adaptive timing. The system recalculates injection duration every 17 milliseconds based on live thermal sensor data. Another stunned engineer slowly turned to the guy beside him. That eliminates the pressure variance, killing efficiency under shifting loads, he whispered mostly to himself. The scrap metal illusion was shattering. Diana hadn't moved an inch. She anchored the center of the tight semicircle, gathering around him. Staring down at the motor, her face completely impossible to read in one word. Let's look closer. She saw the hidden masterpiece immediately, not with cheap surprise, but with the quiet respect of pure recognition. Real-world performance numbers, she asked. 285 horsepower, 2.1 liters. Fuel consumption 41% below comparable output motors. Standardized testing conditions, 200 hours of continuous run log data. He reached into that rusty driver's door pocket, pulling out a tiny flash drive. All of it is right here. Diana studied it, then him. Why didn't you show this to someone sooner? Elijah held her gaze. Because nobody opens the door for someone arriving in a $300 beater. That raw truth hung in silence. Sebastian stood 4 feet away, gripping a microphone his assistant just handed over. He never raised it. Real value speaks for itself. Carter shoved forward from the crowd's outer edge. His voice cracked, pitched a little higher than his normal confident register. None of those numbers are independently verified. This is just a controlled display. There's zero third-party confirmation for any of these figures. The billionaire finally turned toward him. I have 47 pages of hand-documented test logs, complete with sensor signatures and timestamps. If you want, I can throw them on the event screen for this whole automotive crowd to review. Test data can be fabricated. I can personally verify the thermal dynamics of that exact combustion chamber. That voice belonged to a compact guy near the back. Mid-40s, hands shoved in the pockets of a cheap plain jacket. He'd been silently watching this whole time. 12 hard years in automotive engineering. The raw thermal efficiency profile visible in that chamber cannot be faked by constructing false log data. You can't fabricate pure physics across 800 hours of operating records. Carter nervously scanned the circle. He glanced at Diana, who completely ignored him now. He checked on Sebastian, who was already back to studying the flash drive's data files. He finally stared at the engineers crowding that rusty hood, firing eager questions at Elijah. You and I know why. They finally realized the greatest treasure was hiding under the ugliest hood. He took a slow step back, slipping entirely outside the circle until he was completely gone. Grace pulled gently on Elijah's worn sleeve. He glanced down. She pointed toward that unpolished engine, her voice dropping to a quiet whisper. Daddy, is that the thing you built for Mama? He crouched down. His voice stayed steady, though it clearly took effort. That's the one. Does she know you finished it? He studied the masterpiece disguised as junk, then faced his daughter. I think she knows. Grace absorbed this with absolute quiet seriousness. Then she placed her toy, Biscuit, on the rusty engine bay's edge, facing the hidden brilliance inside. Biscuit thinks so too, she finally said. Diana stood just 3 feet away. She caught every single word. She turned from the crowd. Charlotte, standing right behind her, noticed her shoulders drop with one deep breath. Sebastian called for a quick recess. He paused the afternoon car show schedule, gathering the judges in a room off the main floor. The private conversation was incredibly short. They reviewed the engineering specs, and they cast their votes. You and I know real value hides. At 4:45, Sebastian took the stage, demanding attention. His voice echoed through the event speakers, crystal clear and totally unhurried. The Apex Invitational Powertrain Innovation Award. The event's top technical honor, carrying a massive $50,000 prize. And a guaranteed presentation slot in front of the National Automotive Technology Investment Council. This award goes by unanimous decision of our judges to Elijah Monroe of Detroit, Michigan, for a completely novel hybrid combustion architecture, an independently built prototype design showing unmatched efficiency and raw performance. Metrics that completely shatter current automotive industry benchmarks across multiple categories. The applause that erupted wasn't just polite golf clap noise. It was the fierce kind of cheering that only comes from people who watched true genius unfold all afternoon and formed their own absolute conclusions. Rival engineers from the shiny surrounding booths clapped with their hands raised high. The judges who originally trailed Diana across the dusty lot clapped hard. Have you ever hoped to see the underdog win? They had that exact look on their faces. Sebastian stood at the mic, letting the roar continue. Elijah just stood by his beat-up Dodge. He looked toward Sebastian, gave a single nod, and slid his hands into his pockets. Grace tugged his worn jacket. Did we win, Vivon? She processed the moment, then turned to her toy Biscuit, reporting the victory in a hushed, serious whisper. The massive crowd around his humble display thinned out slowly, breaking into small groups of judges and engineers desperate to ask questions and finally look closer at the brilliance. They wanted the deep conversations Elijah was denied for 3 years. He thoughtfully answered every single question with the exact same patient precision he brought to his complex log data. He wasn't faking some humble routine. He was being purely mechanically accurate. Diana waited for the crowd to clear out before walking over. She approached him alone. No assistants, no staff, no corporate framework turning this into a sterile business deal before she was ready. She stopped in front of Elijah, keeping a totally normal, casual speaking distance. Let's be honest, her posture wasn't the arrogant stance we saw at 9 in the morning. Still entirely composed, but now fully recognizing the hidden genius. You and I both know real value hides. Just then her posture completely shifted. It was a tiny change, but real. I owe you an apology, she said. What I said earlier about the salvage yard, that was careless of me. Elijah just studied her. You said what you saw, I said what I assumed. Those are different things, and the assumption was wrong. She offered no extra fluff. No excuses, no defensive walls, just the raw truth. Elijah nodded slowly. He didn't brush it off or say it was fine. He accepted the apology as pure gold, a genuine admission. In its own way, that real respect meant so much more. It proved he saw her words as something holding actual weight. A quiet moment passed. I'd like to discuss what happens next. Diana clarified, for the engine. If you're open, I want to have a conversation. Vance has manufacturing infrastructure and distribution capacity, and the research muscle to take a prototype to full production in 36 months. We also have the legal team to lock down your patents before any money changes hands. You'd own the true value of what you built. That is non-negotiable for me. Elijah stayed quiet, guarding his thoughts. I have conditions. Tell me. He looked right into her eyes. Grace is not affected by any deal. Any timeline I agree to doesn't change what my daughter needs from me. She comes first. Any setup that ignores her value ends before it even begins. Agreed, I want a co-development role, not just a buyout. If this hidden tech makes licensing money, I take my share as a partner. I can arrange that. I need to be in the room for technical choices, no advisory stuff. In the room with a deciding vote. Done. Elijah held her steady gaze. He studied her face, ignoring the rich exterior to find the real substance underneath. He saw zero salesmanship. It was that exact same honesty she brought to her apology. Bare and totally real. I'll need my own legal counsel to review any contract before I ever sign. I would honestly think less of you if you didn't, Diana replied. Let's pause here. Something shifted between them. Not warmth, no. It was way too early for warmth, but you could see the roots of genuine respect. That hidden respect was worth millions. Just then, Grace popped up by her dad's leg. She stared up at Diana, running a silent, dead serious child's evaluation of the stranger. Diana dropped all the way down until she was level with Grace's eyes. Hi, she whispered. Hi, I'm Grace, and this is Biscuit. Hello there, Biscuit. Diana addressed the toy rabbit with total seriousness. I also want to apologize for laughing at your dad's old car this morning. Grace studied her closely. Daddy says the shiny outside part doesn't even matter. The hidden inside is the real part. He's absolutely right, Diana agreed. I know, Grace said, casually confirming a hidden truth most adults miss. Diana stood and looked at Elijah. He watched his little girl with the softest, most unguarded look he had shown all day long. She's right, Diana murmured. I know she is, he replied. What happens to those who only see rust? Carter was quietly fired that afternoon. Sebastian delivered the summary in exactly 4 short sentences. His shady request through the event logistics channel had been fully reviewed. It was a clear improper interference in the true evaluation process. A direct violation of the competition's strict conflict of interest protocols. Carter's shiny judging badge was stripped away right then. The high-end auto event politely told him to never return as a judge. The ruling was absolute. Carter swallowed his pride in silence. He grabbed his fancy leather bag from the VIP table crossed the massive convention floor, and walked straight out the main glass doors. The heavy double doors swung shut behind him, just a normal everyday quiet click. No big dramatic exit. Honestly, that quiet thud is exactly what superficial people deserve. Meanwhile, Elijah's rusty Dodge rolled out of the parking lot at 6:48. Headlights flicked on in the early dusk, blending right into westbound highway traffic heading home. Little Grace sat shotgun, clutching biscuit, quietly watching the glowing city lights blur past her. She babbled happily about whether to finish her custom car drawing back home or start a completely new sketch. She eventually drifted off without making up her little mind. Right around mile 4 on the dark highway, she slumped against the seat, fast asleep, with her stuffed toy held loosely in her arms. The old radio picked up a random station on its own without Elijah touching anything. A familiar classic tune drifted through the beat-up speakers. He knew it instantly. Emily always played it on peaceful Sunday mornings. That slow, steady piano melody always took him straight back to the warm kitchen they once shared. Smelling fresh coffee, hearing the morning news quietly humming in the background. Back to a solid, grounded life, long before the tragic night everything fell totally apart. He didn't touch the dial. He just let the memory play out to the end. For the first time in 4 years, he didn't run. Their modest apartment was perfectly quiet when they got home. Elijah gently carried Grace inside from the sleeper car. She was out cold. With her toy still tightly gripped, he carried her upstairs and tucked her in without making a peep. He pulled the frayed blanket right up to her chin. He just stood there by her small bed in the quiet dark. "We won, baby girl," he whispered to the sleeping kid in the empty, humble room. Her chest rose and fell in the steady rhythm of deep sleep. He didn't stick around. He walked to the worn kitchen counter, letting himself finally stand completely still for the first time since 5:30 that morning. Unpaid bills sat in a cheap folder. That old water stain still marked the wall. Folded cardboard still propped up the wobbly old kitchen table. On the surface, nothing changed. But stick with me here. The crushing weight he carried for 3 long years had shifted in ways he couldn't even measure yet. Yet he could absolutely feel it just standing right there. He poured a plain glass of water, drank it down, and headed into the small garage. A harsh, single overhead bulb flickered on when he yanked the hanging cord. His greasy workbench sat against the back wall, covered in 3 hard years of automotive grit. Faded car restoration designs were taped above it, rough edges curling at the corners. Greasy wrenches sat perfectly arranged, sorted over hundreds of lonely, exhausted nights in the shop. His cheap spiral notebook sat in its usual spot, spine heavily bent from constant, desperate use. He paused at the doorway, soaking in this hidden, undervalued workspace for a long minute. He walked over to the sturdy bench and grabbed the dusty notebook. Flipping to page 1, he saw where this sleeper build started, 3 years ago, written in faded pencil, with handwriting much shakier than his normal grip. Written on the terrible night of the funeral. Back when he only had a blank page and a desperate need to build something real for Emily, so Grace would know he tried. That right there is real value. He held the notebook, then set it exactly back in its humble spot. He stared at the garage walls, tracing over scattered tools and blueprints. He stared at the empty concrete floor where that rusty Dodge usually sat. It sat outside tonight. By morning, that battered shell would transform into something nobody could mock again. For the first time in 3 full years. He just stood there in the quiet shop, completely lost on what his next move was. So he flipped off the heavy lights, pulled the shop door shut, headed inside, and finally slept. Let's step back. No one watching Elijah rattle into the luxury Apex Invitational predicted the afternoon. And that was exactly the point. For 3 years, he crafted pure genius in a dusty room far from judging eyes. He had 0 wealthy backers believing in him and absolutely no coworkers checking in. No elite automotive group ever made room for the masterpiece he was building. Just a cramped garage, a 12-amp circuit, a flimsy bench, and a father who showed up without fail. Late at night, once his daughter slept, walking away and giving up simply was not an option he could choose. He was never aiming for a flashy billionaire showcase. He was quietly fulfilling a sacred vow, driven entirely by the invisible heavy weight of grief. A vow to finish this hidden project for Emily, even if the world never saw his work. The fact he actually built something. truly incredible along the way was honestly just a happy accident. Yet in a shallow society obsessed with shiny surfaces, the billionaire Diana took one look and laughed. Her chuckle was not intentionally cruel. It was the reflex of someone judging a book entirely by its cover. That mental shortcut elite crowds rely on when filtering endless noise. They see cheap scrap metal and instantly write off the priceless engineering hidden underneath. But she was dead wrong. Stick with me here. Once the roaring engine proved her snap judgment completely false, she did something almost unheard of for someone with her wealth. She openly admitted her mistake. No excuses, directly to the struggling dad she mocked long after the gawking cameras had turned away. Zero PR spin or public image tactics driving her apology. She owned it simply because she possessed true inner character. That rare ability to face a blind spot without making excuses for it. True humility is vastly scarcer than money and much harder to earn. His daughter Grace was not trying to teach anyone a lesson. She was 6, clutching a stuffed bunny and some crayons, holding a wonderfully simple opinion about her father. His battered car, she spoke plainly, completely blind to the high stakes. Yet kids raised on honest love have a habit of seeing past the ugly rust and speaking absolute facts. The inside is what actually matters. Elijah had taught her this hidden truth over quiet breakfasts and countless normal bedtime stories. Lessons she naturally carried, completely unaware she was even holding them. And that sunny afternoon amidst shiny luxury cars, she simply told it to the laughing billionaire. The wealthy stranger stood speechless, silenced by the undeniable reality under the hood. So what do we learn here? That battered Dodge sat outside under one dim street lamp. Completely unchanged, paint heavily flaking, glass cracked, the rear plate barely clinging to one rusty bolt. Nothing about its ugly outer shell changed after shocking the elite automotive world today. At first glance, it was still the exact same laughingstock. But the devoted father who forged the hidden beast inside, that single dad finally killed the workshop lights and slept for the first time in 3 years, deeply content, completely unaware of what masterpiece he might build next. And if you look deeper, into the silent price of building a rusted dream alone while the crowd laughs, then you realize this old scrap metal is no joke. It holds true worth.